But let's get into it here, and we'll start with Jake Guentzel. And Chad, you have him going to a team in the Metropolitan Division who could use a scorer.
Yeah, that's right. So the first thing with Jake Guentzel that was reported about an hour before we started recording, I believe, by Chris Johnston, I want to say. I'm pretty sure it was Chris Johnston, that the Penguins essentially have a trade done for Guentzel, and they're hoping that it gets to tomorrow evening. That's when they'll be able to pull the trigger, but they essentially have a deal done, and Wednesday evening is when it's going to be announced, unless something comes up in between now and then. So I just wanted to preface by saying that. But yeah, I have Jake Guentzel going to the Carolina Hurricanes here. Not a team that he's been necessarily connected to, but a team who, as we both know, has been searching for scoring forever. And like this would just make so much sense. Carolina was trying to get Elias Pettersson before he signed his contract. And what do we know about trade deadline or teams at the trade deadline? If they don't get their, big fish, their most coveted piece that they're trying to trade for, do they just, kind of roll over and say, okay, our team's fine anyways, don't need you? No, they don't do that. They go out and get, they facilitate a plan B. And I think plan B for Carolina, instead of getting Elias Pettersson, could potentially be Jake Guentzel. So Guentzel makes $6 million. He's a UFA at the end of the year. Someone's going to have to pay him. Something else that's been reported about Guentzel is that the team that he's traded to won't necessarily be extending him. So Guentzel's deal won't come with an extension. So that could impact the price that a team's willing to give up for him. But the reported asking price is a first, a young roster player, and prospects. And I guess prospects has an S depending on the quality of prospects coming back. It could be 1, 2, 3, who knows. But when I was looking at making this deal work, I was looking at Carolina's cap space, and I noticed that if they cleared some cap just by sending guys down who, let's face it, could be sent down, or sending a roster player the other way, in Armchair GM on Cap Friendly, I basically said that they could have about $1.7 million in cap space. So call it $2 million in space. You would have to get Guentzel double retained, essentially, to make this deal work. I didn't include a third team in this mock deal, but that's just something I wanted to put out there. Anyway, here's the deal, Harper. And I want you to tell me, for each one, by the way, like, deal or no deal? Like, do you think this deal goes through? Who says no? Is it realistic? All of that. And we'll get into it. Yep. So to Carolina, Jake Guentzel. And like I said, that's probably double retained. To Pittsburgh, I have a first round pick in 2024. Jack Drury, that's the young roster player going the other way.
Yeah.
Alexander Nikishin, who was a defenseman drafted a few years ago. He's 22 now. He has 56 points in 67 games in the KHL. He's one of their best defensive prospect, third rounder in 2020. And Noel Gunler, who we've talked about at length on this show, who I think would be the perfect Dubas player. A guy who is slight in stature, immensely talented and skilled, but is sort of flown under the radar because of his size and style of play. So that's my deal. What do you think?
Well, look, the first thing with Carolina is that they don't like rentals, right? They don't like paying big prices for rentals. So that is something to consider. However, could this be the year that they decide to bend their principles a little bit when it comes to this? As Elliot Friedman said in the latest 32 Thoughts column of his, does Carolina finally say, all right, we're going to bend a little bit on our principles. We're going to pay a big price for a rental. And given the fact that it's someone with the pedigree of Jake Guentzel, it could certainly be worth it for them. So that's the first thing. Then the other thing is they have some really good prospects quietly. Like, they are a really good team right now. They could win the Stanley Cup. We know all that. They need a scorer, and they do have the prospects to give up. And Pittsburgh, Dubas and company in Pittsburgh have made it clear that they want prospects instead of picks, which I think is the right way to go. So, yeah, I like this. Gunler and Nikishin stand out as the two in particular. Those are crazy numbers that Nikishin is putting up
I know.
in the KHL.
I was shocked to read that, man.
That
like as
amazing.
A defenseman, and he's done it back-to-back years as a 21 and 22-year-old. In a league like the KHL, they don't score in. It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable, and talk about a prospect that has just flown under the radar with those kind of numbers. And then Jack Drury is a good young player who can fit into your roster right away, play in a bottom six role, play up and down your lineup, and he's a pretty good young player as well. And then you had a first round pick in there as well. Yeah. So I'll say deal. I like it. I like the return for Pittsburgh. And again, what have we been saying for years now about Carolina? They could use a goal scorer, just a guy who can get you an easy goal, and Jake Guentzel can certainly do that. So yeah, deal.
100%. And speaking of Carolina here, needing a goal scorer, what happens? What seems like every year in the playoffs for this team, they win a round or two. And it looks like they're going to go on a run, but then the scoring dries up and they just can't get over the hump. And, Jake Guentzel, talk about a playoff player. In 58 playoff games, he has 34 goals and 58 points. So exactly a point per game, 34 goals. This guy is a playoff player and would fit right in on this team. And I think if you're Carolina, the way to win this deal would be to not include one of your better younger roster players. So we've heard Marty Necas. We've heard his name out there. Yeah. We've heard Seth Jarvis. I don't think they'd be willing to do that because he's having a great season this year, Seth Jarvis. But, Necas has been out there. But I think if you're Carolina, the way to win a deal like this is to, if you're going to include a roster player, which I think is the obvious ask from Pittsburgh, it would have to be Jack Drury, and then the trade-off is just to include better prospects, and that's why I included the two that I did. And then if you're Pittsburgh, to win this deal, I mean, to make it a win-win, I guess, on both sides, you want to get prospects who are close. So like you're not going to get, like you don't want guys drafted last season. Essentially is what I'm saying. You want guys who were drafted a few years ago, who are close to the NHL, who can make an impact in the next year or two, because by all accounts, it seems like, as long as Guentzel gets traded, the rest of this team, like the core that is going to stay relatively intact. So you're going to want to build around them with players. So you want guys to be able to help as soon as possible. And I think both of these prospects fit the bill. So that was my mock trade. And I think if I'm both teams, I do it. The only hesitation I have on Carolina's part is that you're not able to get Guentzel re-signed. But man, like their salary cap structure, I think allows for you to sign another high octane offensive player. It just like there's so much talk about Carolina's back end and they've been so good defensively for so many years. But I mean, reallocating some of that money up front to Guentzel for the next 8 years, I don't think that would be a bad decision for management to make. It just obviously comes down to whether Guentzel would want to extend long term in Carolina. They've been a pretty good team, so who knows?
Yeah, exactly. And we know that Carolina, when they have a price, they stick to it, and they don't like to waver away from that price that they've set. So yeah, I mean, this would be an interesting fit, that's for sure. And they've got a lot of interesting decisions to make with their roster after this season. We mentioned a guy like Marty Necas who needs a new contract. He's been out there a little bit. Brett Pesce and Brady Shea, I believe, are both up after this season for them on the blue line. And so if you're Carolina, like if you're Tom Dundon and Don Waddell and Rod Brindamore and everyone in Carolina, you got to be looking at this year as a go-for-it year, because you don't know how different your team is going to look next season.
That's really true. Yeah, just looking at the back end on Cap Friendly right now, Brady Shea, Brett Pesce, Tony DeAngelo, and Jalen Chatfield are all expiring. And then the other three back there, Brent Burns, Jacob Slavin, and Dmitry Orlov, have one more year. So
Yeah.
there could be a lot of turnover here. And that's what I'm saying. Like after this season, they have a ton of UFAs. Teuvo Teravainen is one, and they have RFAs like Marty Necas, like we've talked about. So if they wanted to commit to Guentzel long term, they could. It just all depends if they're able to get that done. And sometimes, that might be the risk that you have to take if you're the Hurricanes in this position. So
yeah, exactly. And I think like this is possible because they have kind of shown a little bit that they are willing to go big game hunting. Like they made a legit offer to the Canucks for Elias Pettersson.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been reported, of course, before he signed that 8-year extension with Vancouver. So that alone should maybe tell you that maybe this year is different. And now maybe not that different because Pettersson is a bit of a different case. Like you could extend him right away. Like that that would be a player who would not be a rental. But obviously he's staying in Vancouver, and this would be a little bit different. But I think that Guentzel would want to extend long term with whatever team is going to.
Yeah, you would think he would want to, but like I mentioned off the top, it's been reported that the team who gets him isn't necessarily going to sign him, so that may impact the value. So I don't know exactly like who that insider is referring to by saying that, because that they're referring to a team. They just haven't been able to say it publicly yet. But I don't know. We'll see. The one thing, like I guess to sort of wrap up on this is, if you're Carolina, and this is sort of the bottom line of my trade, like I was just looking at teams around the league who could potentially make this happen and where Guentzel would fit the best, and Carolina just stood out to me. So I think if you're Carolina, you try to do this at like whatever it costs, really.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I would say deal to your proposed trade right there.